Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have you here. My name is Marche, and I am the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. And just a minute here while I pull up we had a little bit of a snafu with our with our system here. And let me go ahead and pull up my disclaimer. I don't want to read it the wrong way. Every once in a while we have a snafu right before webinars begin. And here we go. Thank you for being patient, everyone. So once again, before we introduce our guests and get started, I need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. We are thrilled to bring you this educational presentation. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. The presenters will answer those queries during or after the webinar today as appropriate. And if you ask a question in the chat box and we're not able to get to it, go ahead and leave your phone number as well. If we can't get to your question, we'll make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event. Once again, we want this experience to be as educational as possible. Please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. That is what we're here for. So I'd love to introduce you to today's guests. Chase Tusshouse is a partner with Tusshouse Group and Tusshouse Wealth Management. Prior to becoming a financial advisor, Chase worked in the manufacturing industry as an engineer for L3Harris and SpaceX. Chase graduated from the University of San Diego with a Bachelor of Arts and Science degrees in Industrial and Systems Engineering. He is a member of the University of San Diego Alumni Board, the co-chair of USD's Shiley Marklow School of Engineering and Computer Science Alumni Council, and a member of the Oceanside Theater Company Board of Directors. He and his wife, Julia, who is our guest speaker today, are parishioners at St. Charles Borromeo in Point Loma and spend their time mentoring local youth. And I hope I pronounced all of those correctly. I'm getting a nod. Okay, thumbs up. Thank you so much. Our presenter today is Julia Tusshouse. She's an experienced school counselor in both private and public schools, and an expert with UC Easy. She has an MA in counseling and psychology for school counseling. Julia supports a diverse population of students within the college application process and helps achieve their post-secondary goals by helping them procure offers of admissions to hundreds of schools, including nearly every Ivy League, UC, Cal State, and other top-rated institutions. And we know college planning and getting ready for either your son or daughter or yourself for college is a big step. And so we're really excited to have Julia here to talk to us. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to her.
Awesome. Thank you.
Quick introduce.
Go ahead, Chase.
Yeah. So,
sorry, I meant to let Chase talk just here for a minute. So go ahead, Chase.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I think my wife should be presenting here, not me. But I just wanted to say, how excited I am to have Julia on this. this webinar. Excited to be part of this. I know I've learned over the years now, just from overhearing things in the kitchen, that college planning and the college application process is difficult. So I am blessed to have just married someone who knows it, but I think you guys will be as well, as Julia shared some of her knowledge. So I'm done. I will kind of be fielding questions throughout, but I'll turn it over to Julia now.
Thanks, Chase, and thank you, Marche. Well, good morning again, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about just some details and some timeline things. There's a million and one things I could talk about in the college admissions process, and I'm sure a million and one questions that could come up. But today our agenda is just to focus on really clarifying and breaking down what is the actual college application process. So talking about what parents and students have control in and how they can progress through this, when it actually starts, what's the timeline of events, what's involved, and then just a little bit of ideas to get started. Since it's January, so it's the beginning of another college admission cycle and season for current juniors in high school. So as seniors are wrapping things up, so if you are the parent of a senior, you still could learn some things from this process, but also really, really emphasizing for any parents of students younger than senior year, so particularly juniors, could get started on some of these things. So the college application process, and pretty much reason inspiration for this is that the word that I hear from all of my parents annually is that it is this overwhelming, complicated, really time consuming. It's going to drain you. It's going to break you. It's going to be this horrifying thing. And I unfortunately just think that our culture and our society and Facebook parent groups and all sorts of chats have really created this culture that the college application process is something grander and bigger and more complex than it really is. And I think parents are losing sight of that a little bit too, even though they might be working adults and they might have gone through college themselves. Like, yes, it might have been a few decades ago, but the application process is still simply filling out an application. So if you are currently unemployed, if you did go to school, or if you even applied to any sort of experience or program in the past that required you to put your name and information about yourself on a piece of paper, then you are already halfway there. That's half the battle of knowing how to do this. So I just want to kind of clarify, demystify, and make things seem a little bit more simple than they have been assumed in the past. So the general timeline of the college application process, although the actual applications can't be filled out till the fall of the senior year, which I'll get into a little bit later in future slides, really the action items can start in the winter of a junior year. So if you have an 11th grade student, that means January through March of their junior year. That is really when it can start. And then it'll progress. There'll be different themes throughout spring of junior year, summer before 12th grade, fall of senior year, and then spring of senior year. So we're talking January to a June. So to start us off, winter of 11th grade, what can we really get doing when a student is a junior for their college application? Starting just college search and research. So that's pretty much as simple as it gets. So there's not a whole lot of action items and tasks that you need to be overwhelmingly stressed about. It's just starting to have a conversation with your student about, hey, where do you want to go? Where do you want to live for 4 years? What kind of college do you see yourself at? What kind of major are you considering? It's not something students need to have figured out and have 100% clarified answers on yet. But in that January through March time, you can start asking those questions and having those casual conversations and encouraging your student to start researching, start looking into colleges. Maybe on a weekend, if you have colleges nearby your home, go just over for a few hours and walk around a campus and start bringing reality to this experience for your students. So making this more fun, making this more enjoyable, making this just exploratory, Googling things, looking at websites, and just going and visiting things nearby. It's a really good way just to get that conversation rolling. College list creation. So that'll be the next step after. Let's say you do tour a nearby college and your student falls in love. Well, start a list, start a Google Doc, start a piece of paper, start something that whatever organizational tool is best for you or best for your student, start listing those schools out. So you don't want to forget things. You don't want to forget details, things that inspired you, things that connected to you and that you really liked. Start listing those schools out of potential places that your student could see themselves at, or that they would even want to consider filling out an actual application for. And then the big action item, I would say, is standardized testing. So we're talking about concrete things you do in the winter and spring of junior year. SAT and ACT are those two standardized tests that students in previous years were required to take in order to enter into a college. So they would have to fill out an application, have things sent from their high school, like their grades and their classes, and they also needed to take this standardized test entrance exam. So it's an SAT and an ACT. Due to COVID, a lot of that has gone away, and test optional is actually a huge piece of our college admissions culture these days, because testing is really an antiquated way of assessing a student's proficiency and abilities to succeed in college. We're starting to see more and more studies come out and have colleges report back, now that they've been going, not requiring these tests for the last couple of years, that they are building more diverse, more interesting, and more proficient and a fit appropriate classes for their college, that they're liking being able to accept students without that test score, because it's bringing students in that they historically would never have been able to have on their campus, maybe because they're not strong test takers, or that's just, they had one bad day the one time that they took that SAT that one Saturday morning, or they couldn't afford to take the test a whole bunch of times or take test prep. So standardized testing, I could do a whole other webinar on, and maybe I will someday. But that is something concrete you can look into and get more answers on in the winter of junior year. And then spring of junior years. Yeah. Go ahead, Chase.
Yeah, I'm used to interrupting you, I'm sure, too much. But we had one question there. So as far as like the college list, like what's like a good number, or should we be thinking in like different buckets?
Yeah.
What would you say on that?
That's a great question. Generally, I would say the final list. So not the winter of junior year list, but the fall of senior year list. A really healthy number right now is around 9 to 12 is usually what I recommend to students. And I always encourage a balanced list. And what a balanced list means, it's including schools that you know your student is going to get into, will most likely get into, and hope to get into. So we categorize those usually as reach, target, and likely. So that means they're likely going to get into it. They're, based on the admission stats that you can find on college websites or conversations or other students that have gotten in that are similar to your student, that they're likely going to get into. Target is, okay, historically I could get in here, but depending on the admission cycle, it might be a little bit tougher from year to year. I'm not quite there, but maybe, could be if I get lucky. And then the reach schools are, those really tough Ivies, really competitive, big public state schools, maybe that get hundreds of thousands of applications each year. So 9 to 12 is the simple answer. But for winter of junior year, I say go crazy, have fun with it. If you really are just loving, you're watching, you just got done watching college football and you just want to be throwing on all of these awesome big sports schools because you're just hyped on the school spirit and the culture of all that, start just adding schools to the list. And then as you start figuring out criteria of what you actually like and what you don't like, you can narrow things down. So winter of junior year, keep it big, 9 to 12 by senior year. So spring of junior year, that's March through June. This is when colleges start to release their essay prompts for your students' admission cycle when they're a senior. So oftentimes students will want to get a head start, especially if you have a student who's in really, really difficult, rigorous classes their senior year or planning on taking rigorous classes, and they aren't imagining having extra hours during their senior year to write a dozen essays, depending on how many schools they apply to. You might want to check out these prompts now. So the common application, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is a main application for schools that have one big essay on it, and they release their prompts. The UCs, University of California releases theirs, and then a lot of other private schools that have supplemental essay prompts, meaning they have their own school-specific questions in addition to the big main personal statement. They'll release their prompts in the spring of a junior year for students to start looking into and prepping and coming up with essay ideas. And even if the particular school you're looking at has not released those supplemental prompts, students can still start looking at essay prompts from previous years, or looking at these main, big Common App essay prompts, and just starting to brainstorm and get ideas. What does your student want to write about? Those questions will start to spark things about themselves and what they've accomplished and who they are right now. And they can start thinking in that way. It's not just starting from scratch in the fall of their senior year. Resume and activities list and creation. This will kind of go hand in hand with the brainstorming for an essay. You want your student to start listing out everything that they've done, everything that they've accomplished, every cool thing they've done starting since ninth grade year. That is what colleges are looking for on the application. So when you're trying to figure out what's on an application, it's literally just your student talking about themselves. If they put in their name, they put in demographic information, and then they start listing, okay, I was in this club, I had this part-time job, I did this internship this summer, I was on this sports team, I got this award when I was on that sports team. It's just literally everything. So students often ask me, can I put this on there? Is this relevant? Do they even care about this? They care about everything. Every single thing your student does outside the classroom goes on that resume or activities section of a college application. They want to know how your student spends their time. And that will also showcase to them who your student is going to be on that college's campus. So really important to start brainstorming just about all the wonderful things they've done. And then college tours. That's been unfortunately not the most accessible thing due to COVID, just limited numbers and campuses being closed to visitors. So I do recommend checking out any virtual tours for colleges. That's been a huge thing about us accessing the internet and using it to its full extent the last 2 years. Every college now has a really, really in-depth visiting tool or resource on their college website. Some it's actual videos, some it's like a virtual tour you can click around and go all the way through campus as if you're actually physically there, almost like virtual reality if you got close enough to your screen. And it's really, really cool to tour colleges that way. Or if you have a college that's local or that you're able to travel to maybe over spring break, going into physically seeing campuses is also really important too, just to get that feeling and experience of what is it like, what kind of college is my student going to like.
Julie, we had a question there.
Yeah.
So someone had asked about like the schools requiring essays. Like, one, do all schools require essays? Does it kind of depend based on your major? And then, if a student maybe isn't a strong writer, is it better to look for schools if they don't require additional essays or an essay period to go in that direction? Would you advice be there?
Yeah. That's also a great question. Not every single school requires an essay. So that is definitely a very, very healthy strategy. And that's an important thing to talk about when we're saying simplifying and making this college process as easy as it can be for your specific student, your specific family. You don't have to apply to all these schools that have, 3 or 4 additional essays of 250 to 300, 500 words. You can apply to schools where it is simply inputting grades, inputting courses, inputting activities, and there's no additional writing required. So if a student's not a great writer, if their activities and their grades speak better to who they are as a person and a student compared to what they would write down on an essay, then that's a great way to pick schools. So if you come across a school that has all those things, take it off the list and don't feel that pressure to do it. There are 3,000 universities in this country, so there's plenty of options as far as finding different fits and different types of colleges who are going to be more accommodating depending on who your student is. And I think that answered fully the question. Did I miss any additional things, Chase?
No, that was great. Thank you. No, you would never. You're perfect. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Moving on. So summer before 12th grade, the June to August timeframe. So we've already started the college tour. You've got a little bit of a list building or a lot of a list building, maybe some essay prompts started. And we're going to be working on that essay writing. So working on those prompts that were released and came out in spring potentially, and starting to conceptualize what those actual essays will look like, coming up with a first draft. So the prompts are oftentimes things like pick an activity that really inspired you, or pick something that really resonated with you, or this is our school motto. How do you see yourself fitting in? What would you bring to the table if you were a student here? And those are the types of questions your students going to be tackling, and taking advantage of those few months when they're not in school over summer before senior year will be a really good way for them to get a first draft going into filling out the actual application in August. Chase, were there any follow-up questions to the essay writing that I should clarify?
Yeah, just the as you're talking about the essay writing, like maybe how to prepare for that as you're going and getting the draft together. Looks like there's a few questions pertaining to that. So maybe you could walk us through sort of that process, or maybe what are some good habits to develop to eventually create a really good essay.
Really good essay. Absolutely. And essay writing is also, I will say, another potential full-length webinar. There's lots and lots of good books out there, blogs, and conversations that you can tap into when it comes to writing a good college essay. So I will say that my number one advice and blanket statement is to allow your students to be their natural self. Colleges are looking to see who your student is. They don't want essays that are saying the right things and doing the right things and saying what they think adults want them to hear. That is the number one thing I hear from college reps that they absolutely can't stand. They hate it when a student copies and pastes something from the school website and then just says all these perfect little answers, perfect fancy things to say like, I love this. You know, they want to get to know your student through those essays. So finding the voice of your student is going to be what's important. And the way that I always start with the essay writing in particular, when I'm walking my students during our college application boot camp we have, or if they have a writing coach through my UC company, that what they do is they start with like just brainstorming word vomiting. So if you read the prompt and it says, you know, pick an activity that really inspired you and is something you'd want to do in college, have your students start to just write everything that comes to mind. Have it not sound pretty. Don't have it sound perfect. Don't have it sound all put together as if it's something that, oh, I can't turn this into my English teacher, I'll get a bad grade. Just throw all that out the window and just have them start writing things and thoughts that come to their mind. And that when they start to do that, they'll start to find their voice. They'll start to find a way that they portray themselves, things that stand out and mean something to them. And I think a really, really good way to help once they've done that kind of initial brainstorm and word vomit is share those ideas out loud, have them actually speak those things to a close friend, maybe a family member who's, you know, really knows your student well, and have them help them kind of hone that in and say like, oh, that really sounds like you. That sounds like something that will reflect you. If I were to read this, I felt like I just had a conversation with you. That's kind of the goal of the college essay. And that's how you want to start it. Just have them do all that word vomiting, brainstorming. And then over the process, as they get, you know, into school, you can have an English teacher read it. You can have their college counselor at their high school read it. If they have an outside college counselor that you've hired to help your student work through this process, they can read it and work on it and edit it. So initial thoughts, finding your voice, and then having a few trusted people read and help work on those drafts. I wouldn't say start having a million people read it, because too many cooks in the kitchen is often a problem I see with student essays, where they've overworked it. They're trying to bring in too many opinions and they start to overthink. And at the end of the day, you always want the student to come back to themselves. What do they want to convey? What do they want to say? What is meaningful to them? And how can they portray themselves to a college outside of just reading courses and grades and activities they've done? I think that helps a little bit more.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Julie. I think, I mean, you hit it. Like, you know, this is what is going to be the best match for the student, right? And and to be themselves and find an environment that helps them grow into that. You know, you want to be authentic in every step of the way here. So I think that's great advice. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Finding the right college is basically, you know, I sometimes joke with some students, it's like dating. You need to say yes to them and they need to say yes to you back. You want this to be a partnership. You want it to be something that you both agree upon. You don't want to be chasing after a school that, you know, you're too good for anyway, and you don't want to worry about. You want to find the right fit. So fall of 12th grade, this is the time. This is when it really, really all starts. So although you've done all this prep work, starting in junior year, spring of junior year, you're working on that resume list. You've got some essay drafts, maybe you've got like a rough list of colleges, or maybe even a finalized list of colleges that you know, I want to click submit and pay $50 to $90 to apply to this college. Now is the time to go. Those applications. So there's 3 different ways for students to apply to a college. The 2 ones that you can see I've listed here that are actual application websites are the Common Application and the Coalition Application. These 2 types of applications actually work for multiple colleges. So the Common Application, I think, has about 2,000, or maybe it's 1,500, somewhere around there, over 1,000 institutions that they've partnered with. in order to make the college application process easier. So students will go to commonapplication.com, they create an account, and then they can add on any school that is a member of the Common Application to their Common Application. And then that way it's all housed in one website. They're not going to 18 different websites or 9 to 12 different websites to find different applications with a bunch of different logins. So the Common Application really tries to bring it all together. And oftentimes a student can have just Common Application schools. They don't need to create any other account. Maybe all 10 of the schools they apply to happen to all be on the Common Application platform, and they can use that. So that opens August 1st. And then the Coalition application is another similar one that was created actually by college admissions reps. So different people that work at universities created another version of it. It also works. I will say that it has less participating institutions, but there are some colleges out there that only allow you to apply through Coalition application. So you just want to check and see when you're shopping around with your schools, looking into their websites, what applications do they allow? And then you're always going to want to go with what's the most simple. If the school is on Coalition and on Common App, but then they end up having more Coalition schools, maybe you stick with a Coalition application and then you don't do the Common App. So you can start to see how that pattern and that theme is going as your student is building their list. And then the third option is a direct to institution application. These are schools that are not on Common App or Coalition. They have their own application that you'll have to go to their website, click on, create this, and it will create another additional account for them to apply to. So really good examples of this are Texas Apply. So the Texas schools have their own system. The UC, University of California system has their own. Also the Cal State, so California State Schools, the state schools in New York, they have their own system. So there's a lot of private or public school systems that have their own direct institution application, state specific, college specific. So you just want to be attentive to that. And my number one advice when launching into fall of 12th grade is organization, organization, organization. So have a spreadsheet of this going. If you have your list of 9 schools, have a column for what application it is, and then also have a separate tab for what the website login and password is for those. That is something huge I do with a lot of my students that I work with on a one-on-one basis, is helping them organize and making sure they keep track of that, because there's nothing more frustrating than when a student comes in and is panicking over, I got an email from a college, something is missing, and they're trying to show me, but then they have to reset their password because they couldn't remember the website or the login. And it adds so much additional stress that they can avoid when hiccups happen, because they do. The college application process is technology based. So as is with all technology-based things, there are hiccups that happen that can easily be fixed, but we just want to make sure we're supporting our students and keeping them organized. And then oh yes, just quickly, standardized testing too. That is another thing students can continue to test in the fall of senior year. So sometimes families think that they can only take an SAT and ACT before senior year, but actually many colleges will still accept test dates if they're still working on it, increasing their score, or if they need to squeeze a test date in there because they found a school that is requiring it. You can still test in the fall of senior year. Now we can move on. So fall continued. There's going to be a lot of action items and a lot of things that come up. So again, back to that organization piece, we want to think about what is in the student's hands, what's in the parents, and what's the school's responsibility. So the student's responsibility is to create those applications. That's creating those accounts, going to those websites, putting in their personal information and getting it going. The parent's responsibility, obviously parents can be very hand-holding, can be very hands-off. It always depends on who your student is and what kind of support they need. But your main role is really just filling out anything having to do with financial aid. Your student is capable of doing this from start to finish completely on their own, except for if you're applying to financial aid, you do have to fill out the government application, the FAFSA, for the application, if that's what you're seeking. So that's kind of a nice way of looking at it, that you really do get to step back, wash your hands of it, and allow your student to take ownership over this process. You are not needed unless you are helping them pay for that application fee and if you're doing financial aid. So unfortunately, I know it seems like parents are only about money, but that is the only thing that you really have to worry about and make sure that you have a hand in. It's a good way to empower your student, to remind them that they're in charge of applications, and then letting you know about when they're filling out the financial aid application. And then the school responsibility, I always like to highlight this, that sometimes it's a lost piece or a confusing piece, that your student school counselor at their high school or their registrar, whoever's in charge of their letters of recommendation, their transcripts, and anything having to do with school information, that is all the school's responsibility. So your student needs to be attentive to any messaging that comes out from your student's high school, whether it's from their counselor, from a support class they might be in, from the principal, whoever takes ownership over the college admissions process at your high school. Listen to those instructions. They will tell you at the beginning of the semester, or maybe they'll start talking to you about it in their junior year if you're students at a college prep high school, of how to request letters of recommendation, how to make sure transcripts are sent to universities, how to make sure all those supporting documents are sent. And we do it every single year, so it's not like we're reinventing the wheel. There's definitely a process at your student's high school. So just make sure you're paying attention to that communication, attending parent nights, reading newsletters, and staying on top of that communication to make sure that no pieces of the application are missed. I think so. For spring of 12th grade, this is where we get into the exciting part. So in the fall, deadlines are happening. That's when college applications start to be due. Essentially, if your student is applying early, they might be due as early as November, or oftentimes I tell students to apply to the regular decision deadlines, which usually happen between December through March. So that's when your student absolutely has to turn in the application. So deadlines are a very important piece too to pay attention to. Having those applications all ready to go and clicking submit well before a January 1 deadline, or maybe a February 1st deadline. You don't want students to get too close to that date, because technological mishaps do happen. But once your student has submitted all their applications, they've got all their essays in, your school has sent all the documents, you've sent in financial aid information, all of that, students are just in a waiting game. So spring is about enjoying the second semester of senior year, making sure they're staying on top of their grades still, and not letting senioritis hit too much. Or if your family is concerned also about the fees and the payments, and obviously all the money is starting to build and feel very expensive. Additional scholarship applications tend to come out and be available for students when they're in the spring of their semester. So I've had students that go to scholarship search websites, or they look at ones that are available at the universities they've applied to, and they actually can apply for additional money and find and pay for their entire college experience just through maybe outside scholarships as well. So talking again to your school counselor or a college counselor you're working with about scholarship resources, it's a really good way for students to spend that extra time that they've just been devoting to an application in the fall. They can spend spring applying to more scholarships. And then the big decision date is May 1st. So decisions will start to come out as early as January, can be as late as April. But your student will start to receive decisions, and they'll start to receive financial aid offer letters. And by May 1st, usually colleges would need an answer from you. That can also be different depending on the school. There are schools that allow you to commit after if you need a little bit more time to think about it and weigh options. But those are all good things to pay attention to, are just those deadlines again. When do I have to commit to the school? When is the housing application? When is priority housing? If your student wants to get the best housing opportunity on campus, that's a strategic way that colleges get you to commit to them earlier. They say you can have priority housing if you commit to us by March 1st instead of May 1st. So all good things, exciting things, but things to pay attention to in that spring of senior year. Chase, were there any follow-up questions?
Yeah, we've got a few that kind of cover a little bit of a range. I didn't know if you had another slide left before we really dove into Q&A, but happy to.
Why don't we go ahead and hold those till the end?
Okay.
And
Sounds
we're
good.
almost done with
Perfect.
our prepared remarks, and then we'll go ahead and fill the bunch of questions.
Sounds good.
Great.
Alrighty, so how to get started. So that obviously was a lot of information. There's so much more that can be unraveled in each of those stages in the college admissions process. But that's the brief overview. That's kind of what it looks like from January to spring, or January of junior year, spring of senior year. And then how can you get started now? So depending on where you're at, you can decide, what piece of it you need to be working on right now. But college websites, they're a little overwhelming, but they also are rich with information. So taking a moment, breathing, going to those actual websites and reading through everything and looking into programs and looking into what the school's culture is and watching videos and looking up resources. Obviously, you're all very skilled at that as you are participating in a webinar right now. So keep using those skills that you already naturally have to research those websites. Take advantage of college tours, like I said, either virtually or on campus, college visits. That would be the on-campus version. And then college fairs. This is a huge thing that happens right now in spring. Different companies and different consortiums of colleges start to host virtual fairs or on-campus fairs where multiple colleges come together and do presentations on themselves or do little bite-sized 5-minute. This is about, Fordham University. This is about University of Seattle. This is about University of Portland. And they'll give you a showcasing of their school and allow for question and answer. So those fairs are a really good way to have experience with multiple colleges instead of just spending a lot of time on one specific webinar. You can get to know a few. And then obviously the student school resources, their school counselor. There's going to be a college admissions page or some sort of resource through your school's high school that you want to start looking into and just paying attention to that communication now. And then an outside college counselor. We are in a day and age where, although I know I'm saying it, simplifying it, obviously there's a lot of pieces still. So if you are someone who would like that extra hand holding, would like that extra instruction, and just a little bit of clarity through each step, or you feel like your student is someone who's just not quite ready to handle it all completely on their own and would like a little bit of help launching them into handling it on their own, an outside college counselor is a great choice. That's very family and student specific, but those will be some really good resources to get you started. And that's my presentation. And this is a little bit about the company I work at, UC Easy. It is an outside college counseling company that helps simplify just the high school and college admissions process. We work with students from 8th grade to 12th grade, a few different programs, and obviously a really good type of resource to access if you're looking for that extra additional support.
All right, I think we're ready for the Q&A period. And I will say to our attendees, this is the time you can go ahead and type in the chat what your question is, and we'll do our best to answer those.
Great, thanks, Marche. So yeah, we had a few questions kind of come in there, kind of hitting a few different topics you had discussed. So, so one of them, maybe you could start with just acceptance dates. If we talk about what does that timeline look like, like early versus regular, but also what does it mean? Like, what are you committing to if you apply early versus regular decision?
Yeah.
And kind of walk us through that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the decisions, the deadlines, that's a huge piece of deciding how a student is going to apply. So there's a first wave, there's an early application or early decision period. So that's going to be as early as October 15th up to December 1st. Students can apply by these earlier deadlines. Those are fall deadlines. Colleges are starting to offer different formats depending on how committed a student is to a certain school or how early they want to hear back from schools. I really only recommend applying to a school early if the student feels like their GPA is feeling good, they have their testing done, they've really done good work on their essays, maybe over summer or all of August, and they just are feeling ready to go. They want to get those applications in November 1st or October 15th for a few colleges in the South. And then November 1st is really the big early admission or early decision deadline. And the difference between those two, EA or ED, you'll start to see that terminology on college websites. EA just means I want to turn my application in early and I want to find out early. There's no commitment, there's no binding nature to it. It's just early action. I'm taking action early to this school. Early decision, which is also the same deadline, it can be November 1st. You just click a different button on the application saying, I'm applying early decision. You can only apply that way to one college. So you can't make that contract with multiple universities. ED or early decision means I am deciding early. So I have chosen this school, let's say Chapman University is my number one. I'm in love with it. They have an incredible business and arts program, and I want to do both of those, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else but Southern California. You can go ED to Chapman, and then if they accept you, then you are required to go there. You have agreed to a binding contract with them. Early decision means deciding early. If you accept me, I 100% am going. colleges like students to apply ED for very obvious reasons of they know you're a guaranteed student in that class the following year. So when they're looking at finances, when they're looking at building their class for what kind of students they want or need, or trying to create, their building, as far as in majors and diversity and all sorts of things. ED means that you might have a little bit of a better chance of getting into the school because you're saying, I'm 100% going to pay the tuition and I'm 100% going to go to this school. So ED sometimes can have an increase in the acceptance percentage compared to the overall general acceptance rate to a college. And you can only apply to one school early decision. And the way that they keep that checks and balances is that your student's high school counselor has to sign a contract, an early decision contract, saying I've agreed that I'm only signing one of these for this student, and they cannot apply ED to a school unless that college counselor has signed off on that. So it's a little bit of checks and balances, but it is also an honors system that you are going to go to that school if you apply ED. And then as far as the other decisions, so regular decision, those deadlines are a little bit later. That just means that that's the regular timeline. That is I'm still working on my applications, or I want my fall semesters from senior year grades to be included in my application. So I'd like to submit in a December or a January or a February date. And when you start to hear back from those colleges, so to go back to the early, if you apply early, you find out by Christmas. You find out early December, mid-December. So oftentimes students like to know, okay, I'm at least into one of my colleges, or I'm into my dream college, or I'm not into my colleges and I need to apply to a whole bunch more regular decision. You can find that out in December and then still make it to deadlines that are in January, February, March. And then the students who apply to those later deadlines, those January, February, March ones, will end up finding out from colleges in that a few weeks later, depending on how the school operates, or they'll end up finding out January through April. So students can find out as late as middle of April, but that's the timeline. It really depends on the school of when, and usually they'll have that information on their website too, and like frequently asked questions on the admissions page of what kind of the timeline is for when they'll release their decisions based on which deadline you apply to.
So a follow-up question to that. So obviously one of the potential decisions is being waitlisted. So if your student is waitlisted, or what can they do? What is the advice there? Is it kind of like, well, I just have to wait till enough spots open up? What would you say to in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered it a little bit. You are in a waiting game. There are certain universities that will be willing to accept additional information. So there's two words for waitlist. One is deferred and one is waitlist. If you applied early to a school, you met that November 1 deadline, and then the decision that your student gets in December is you were deferred. That means you're great, but you're not quite good enough to accept this early. We want to see your first semester senior year grades. We want, maybe an additional letter of recommendation. We want a continued letter of interest from you, and we'll consider you in our regular applicant pool. So that's deferred. You've just been deferred to the second wave of applications. And then waitlisted is what ends up happening for students after they've been deferred or after they've applied regular. They truly are in a waiting game. Many colleges don't want additional information from the student because they're already so inundated, and it truly is just waiting to see who is committed to them, and they can see, okay, we've had all of our responses back, we now have a space for you. And sometimes that unfortunately means a student will get off a wait list in summer, and so students could end up committing to a school by May 1st and then changing things up if they get off a wait list over summer. So there are definitely different things that happen there. But I really would pay attention to the communication from the college. That at the end of the day is the most important thing to focus on. If a school says, please send us any new accomplishments or any letters of recommendation in addition, any new information. They don't want old stuff that was on the original application. They want to know, is there anything else that we can consider that you've completed in your senior year that will help us accept you further? But if they say we accept nothing, don't send them anything. That is only going to hurt you and flag you in the process. If a college says they don't want anything, it's because they're overwhelmed. They have too many applications. They're really not going to consider it. And all you'll do is put your name into a basket of annoying people in their mind. So listen to what the colleges are communicating to you.
Is this process, as we're talking about like the deadlines and the timetable and everything, is it going to be pretty similar for community colleges and trade schools, or is that a different animal?
totally different
organization.
animal and much, much simpler. I love the community college trade school route because they do make it so user-friendly. It really is. Your student gets to just focus on being a senior in high school, and then spring of their senior year. So pretty much around March to May time, depending on where your local community college is and what their registration period is. They'll go to that college's website, or they'll go to the admissions office or registrar office of that local community college they want to attend. And all you have to do is just fill out an application to register to be a student. As long as you graduate from high school, you are eligible to go to a local community college or a trade school. There's no additional essays and testing and all sorts of pressure that you have to have a certain GPA. You just need to graduate. So it's really a wonderful option. I always say it starts in spring of senior year because that's when priority registration usually is, and your student has a better chance of getting into the classes they want. But realistically, you could register at community college all the way, up to fall of when they want to attend that community college. So it's a long period of time, but priority would be that spring of their senior year to make sure they get classes.
Great, thank you. So as we do kind of come up close to the end of our time here, we're going to ask one more question, and then any other questions I'm sure you'd be happy to connect offline and help address with. But so the last one, it might be a bigger one. So scholarships. I felt like when I was going through the college admission process, I just had this idea, maybe my parents did too, being the oldest in our family, that people would just reach out and offer scholarships. I realized that's not the case unless you're like my little brother and you're playing football and you're being recruited, right? So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then where can we find resources? Does it take maybe reaching out to a company like UC Easy to really figure out like how to find the best fits? And it sounds like there's some effort needed to reach out and figure out what's out there, what might be applicable for your student.
That's a great signing off motto and word of advice, Chase. Yes, it does take effort. It does take work. It's not going to come to you. It does require a lot of reading. That is, again, why the stereotype of it feeling so overwhelming and so complicated ends up happening, because there's so much information, students and families get burnt out. But there are resources out there. And if you take your time with things and read through and use the right resources, it absolutely will guide you to the right places. So there's 6 to 7 scholarship search engines that I give to my students, even starting in spring of their junior year, that literally students will put in their demographic information, their name, where they're from, what courses they've taken in high school, all sorts of things. And it literally will match students to scholarship applications that they are already pre-eligible for. So it's like getting pre-approved for a loan or credit card or something, but even better because it's free money, you don't have to pay back. So I have students match through these websites on average. Instead of looking at the thousands of scholarships that are out there, it will match students to about 70 to 200, depending on their demographic information or what, so scholarships are so specific. They can be for a certain, ethnic background. They can be for a certain major. They can be for, a certain age. And so there's all sorts of specific ones out there, and you want to filter those out to find the ones that are right for your students. So using those search engines. And my number one advice is to never pay for a scholarship. Please, please, please do not pay for free money. That is so counterintuitive. It's something that doesn't bode well for your student if they're trying to pay a fee in order to pay for college. So avoid any of those ones that are going to charge you a service fee. A few of the websites that my number one that I recommend to students is goingmerry.com. And then there's obviously a bunch more that if you're working with outside college counselor, if you are working with me or working with UC, we can refer and recommend a few more. But those are definitely the directions that I would go in as far as the scholarships that are outside. And then school-based scholarships are really important. So looking at the financial aid and scholarship page of the individual college that you're applying to, oftentimes there's a whole database of scholarships available to students, like where you actually graduated from, Chase, University of San Diego. Once you're admitted and enrolled at USD, they have a few hundred scholarships that you can apply to as a student enrolled and committed to USD. So it's not something you can access before you are accepted and committed to a school, but you always want to be paying attention to those scholarship and financial aid websites at the actual individual campuses, because they'll have a lot of really good resources And they'll actually have additional search engines too, for you to look for other scholarships. So that again, probably could be its own webinar.
There were hundreds out there.
I
Oh
know,
my
sorry,
gosh,
Chase.
what was I doing?
Yeah, what were you doing?
Yeah, I probably was just viewed as too smart, too hardworking of a student. Yeah, I
That's what
get
it
that.
was.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a reason I'm not an engineer anymore. So anyways, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Julia. As always, it's a pleasure working with you and also being married to you. So
Oh,
I am
okay.
done. I will
Someone
let
cut him off.
Marche in this. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys. This has been great information. And then Julia, we will just take it as an invitation that you want to talk about scholarships on our next webinar.
Apparently, yeah. I think
All
so.
right. All right. Well, that's a really great topic. And so we will plan that. To everyone who have attended, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to the organizations that have made this webinar possible today. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming. And we will see you at another webinar soon. And I just want to say, in case Julia, you didn't know, you're getting a lot of thank yous for the information in the comments, and thanks for being a great resource. So thank you again, everyone. We will see you at another webinar. Bye, everyone.